Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Week 14 Saturday main slate for college football DFS. That is right. It is whatever you want to call it, Thanksgiving Saturday, Rivalry Week Saturday, last day of the regular season Saturday, whatever you want to call it. That is what we're going to be breaking down. We've got a 12-game main slate on DraftKings as well as a quite hefty main slate on FanDuel as well. So we're going to be breaking down every single game that's on the DraftKings slate, but obviously all the player takes that we talk about for DraftKings will apply for FanDuel as well. So whether you're playing on DraftKings or FanDuel, we've got you covered. We're going to tell you who needs to be in or out of your DFS lineups here on this slate, as well as what you can expect from each and every game here on this Saturday slate. Now, before we continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. I know college football season is winding down, but we're going to have you covered all the way through bowl season and the college football playoff. We are also going to have college basketball content all the way through the Final Four as well. So make sure you're subscribed so that we can be there for all of that. If you love college football DFS like I do, then it's quite likely that you will enjoy college basketball DFS, because they're very similar in how you can structure your lineups and how you can play DFS. They're quite similar. It's not like NFL or NBA where you have a ton of sharps out there. They're just winning the money every night. You can compete in that, and I can help you do that if you check out my content. All right, but anyway, let's go ahead and dive right in. We got 12 games to break down, a lot of which are rivalry games. This is a good slate, so let's go ahead and start talking about it. All right, so let's go ahead and kick things off with the battle in the Bluegrass State. Louisville taking on Kentucky. Louisville is 4-point favorites in this one with a game total of 49.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 27-23 in favor of Louisville. Now, this is an interesting game because you've got a quarterback change with Kentucky, right? More on them in a second. On the Louisville side, Kentucky is a decent defense. Like, they're an SEC defense. So they're going to be better than most of the defenses that Louisville has played. Tyler Shuck, in my opinion, just does not have the upside to warrant playing. He is priced at his salary of $7,500, meaning he's going to need about 22, 23 DraftKings points in order to hit 3x value, about 30 DraftKings points in order to hit 4x value, and he hasn't hit 30 all season. He hasn't hit over 23 very often at all. So I just don't really see there being a whole lot of upside in playing him. I do like Isaac Brown, though, who is their workhorse running back that they are building around. Aside from the Stanford game, which he left early, he's had 2 games over 23 DraftKings points in a row, 3 games over 23 DraftKings points in a row. Again, aside from that Stanford game. And really, this Kentucky defense we have seen get run on by the likes of Jarquez Hunter to the tune of 40 DraftKings points. So I do think that you can run on them. And if Louisville is playing ahead, I think that means more rushing volume for Isaac Brown. So I do think he's a pretty solid play. At the wide receiver position, Ja'Cory Brooks has been the alpha for Louisville all season long. I don't really feel the need to target this Louisville passing game, though. Chris Bell has been also really solid ever since the departure of Colin Lacey. Back-to-back 100-yard games for Chris Bell. But, I just don't really feel the need to target this passing game. If you're looking to kind of target like a dart throw as well, Katarius Hicks, last game against Pitt, 6 catches, 63 yards, moving into a starting role. I wouldn't mind targeting him either, just as like a $3,000 stone minimum dart throw that you can play in GPPs. Now, on the Kentucky side, they are making a change at quarterback. They are starting the true freshman Cutter Boley. He, as a Texas fan watching that game, he did not strike any fear in me when he dropped back to pass. He wasn't all that great. He's a salary of $4,500, which is intriguing. Anytime you can get a quarterback at $4,500, you got to be a little intrigued by him. And Louisville ranks 96th in the nation in passing yards allowed per game. So this is a good matchup. He's at the bare minimum price tag, but if he's not actually good, it's not going to matter. If you want to include him in your player pool, I think that's fine. Because again, anytime you have a quarterback at $4,500, he's got the potential to break the slate if he puts up 20, 25 DraftKings points. But I just don't see it being a super likely outcome, given what I saw last week and what we've seen from this Kentucky offense all season long. At the running back position for Kentucky, it's kind of just a mess now with Sumo Convai, Wilcox, and Tradenham all being active. Wilcox is the guy that did see the lion's share of the work last week against Texas. He's double-digit carries 3 weeks in a row. I don't really feel the need to try to target somebody in this running back committee, though. At the wide receiver position, the good news is if you're playing Cutter Boley, he really is only going to throw to 2 guys, and that's Dane Key and Barryon Brown. They're really the only 2 that I think you can have interest in. Key is more of like a possession volume type of guy, whereas Brown is like a big play threat. So Brown also returns punts. Brown also gets used on jet sweeps and handoffs and stuff like that. So I think, depending on what you're looking for, I think that a little Bowley Brown stack will be super cheap, and it would actually come with a ton of upside. But again, I'm not going to build like all of my lineups and all my portfolio around Cutter Bowley. He's going to be a guy that's going to make my player pool, probably in my 20 max, make one or two of my lineups. And in both those, he's probably going to be stacked with Barry Brown. Game number 2, we have got the battle in the Palmetto State, South Carolina taking on Clemson. Clemson is currently 3-point favorites with a game total of 49.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 26 to 23 in favor of Clemson. Now, South Carolina has kind of had a little bit of a running explosion or offensive explosion in the recent weeks. I kind of got out of order there. They've had an offensive explosion in recent weeks, and it's been because of their running game. They currently rank 16th nationally in rush rate, and a lot of that is because Lenora Sellers is a dual threat. He has been really, really good lately. 3 of his last 4 games have been 37 DraftKings points or more, and those have come against some good defenses. Like we're talking 37 against Texas A&M, 40 against Missouri. Like, Texas A&M is actively good, but Missouri's no slouch. So I do think that this is a pretty good spot for him. He's averaging 14 rushing attempts per game pretty much since the middle of the season. At a salary of $7,100, I don't think he's a bad option. The only downside is that Clemson is a pretty stout defense. They rank 30th in the nation in rush yards allowed and 64th in the nation in passing yards allowed. So this is not the best matchup for Sellers, but his dual threat abilities do bring with him a ton of upside. And he's going to make my player pool just because he does have that upside to give you like a 40 DraftKings point performance. At the running back position, Rocket Sanders is the workhorse back for this team. You got to feel like if the offense is going to be having success, Sanders is going to be having success as well. I don't think he's a bad option, but I don't think he's necessarily the best points per dollar option because, again, this Clemson defense is pretty tough. Why would you play a running back going up against one of the best run defenses on the slate? I just don't really see a huge amount of appeal in Sanders on this slate, in my opinion. At the wide receiver position, I truly believe that you can play Lenora Sellers unstacked. I don't think you have to find a stacking partner with him. But if you were, the 2 most likely candidates to stack him with are questionable for this game. Jared Brown is a Coastal Carolina transfer who had been kind of their big play threat through most of the season, but is currently banged up. Josh Simon is their tight end who had been their number 1 target, but did not play against Wofford last week. I don't know why he didn't play against Wofford. I don't know. So I don't know if he's going to play in this one or not. I can't find any updated information on it. It'd be something that you'd have to check before kickoff. And then Nick Harbor is kind of just like a super athlete. If you play college football 25, he's the guy on there that's 6'4", 220 and 99 speed. He's just a cheat code on the video game. He scored touchdowns in back-to-back games, so he is getting more and more involved in the offense. But prior to that, he really just hadn't seen a whole lot of consistent involvement. Maybe he's worth a look as a stacking partner at 3,200 because there's always a likelihood that he could break off a super long play. On the Clemson side, they've got quarterback Cade Klubnik, and he's been really good this season. Like anybody who doubted Cade Klubnik, like they really have just kind of had to eat it because he's been really, really good, right? Now, in the last few games from a DraftKings perspective, he hasn't had a ceiling game in quite a while. Hasn't topped 29 DraftKings points since week 7 against Wake Forest. But this is a pretty good time to do so. I think this game has some sneaky shootout potential. I could see this game getting up and down. And Klubnik's got a lot of upside. Clemson's projected to score 26 points in this one. So if Klubnik accounts for 3 or 4 touchdowns, then he's going to be in really good shape to beat his $8,600 salary. At the running back position, Phil Maffa is still the workhorse back for this team. He has really kind of run into tough sledding as of late, though. But the good news is that the workload is still there. The touches are still there. So I think it's a pretty good buy low spot for him. Considering that South Carolina is a better pass defense than run defense. They rank 18th in passing yards allowed and 34th in rushing yards allowed. I think that this is not a bad spot for Maffa in case Clemson does try to attack through the ground. And then at the wide receiver position, Antonio Williams has looked like a wide receiver 1 in recent weeks. He had 13 catches against Pitt, was targeted 8 times in a game against the Citadel where he did not play all of that game. He's looking more and more like the alpha that this team kind of needs him to be in the receiving room. But I do think that this Clemson team has a bevy of cheap receivers that could all hit value. You've got super talented freshmen Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore that I would be interested in. And then you've got, if Jake Brenningstool does not play in this game at tight end, then Olsen Pat Henry would be the backup tight end that he could come into that role and maybe be that possession volume type receiver that, Brenningstool normally is. I think that all of those guys would be in play, especially in stacks with Cade Klubnik. Next up, we have got Tennessee taking on Vanderbilt. I wish I had a fancy name for this one, but I don't know. I'm not aware of a name for this rivalry or of a state nickname for Tennessee, so I'm all out. Either way, Tennessee is 11-point favorites with a game total of 48.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 30-19 in favor of the Volunteers. On the Tennessee side, Nico Iamaleava is at a super cheap price tag. But I just don't know if I can pull the trigger. Like when you look at his game log, he's accounted for 15 passing touchdowns on the year, and 10 of them have been against either UTEP, Chattanooga, NC State, or Kent State. He has only thrown for 5 total passing touchdowns in SEC play. That is not great. It's just not. It's not ideal. However, if there were ever a time for him to do so, it would be against Vanderbilt, because Vanderbilt's kind of a pass funnel. They rank 43rd in the nation in rushing yards allowed per game, 112th in the nation in passing yards allowed per game, so you can throw on Vandy. The question is if Nico is actually going to get to throw enough passes to make it worth your while. Big reason why is because Tennessee ranks 14th in the nation in rush rate. This is a team that is going to run the football. There's not going to be a whole lot of passing volume from Nico, so I really think you would be dependent on him to either hit big plays or score touchdowns through the air, as opposed to, give yourself a game where he's got like 40 attempts and 300 yards. I don't think that's happened from Nico. So you're going to need touchdowns or you're going to need big plays. And at salary $5,500, he intrigues me, but I'm not sure if I'm going to pull the trigger. At the running back position, I really do like Dylan Sampson. In fact, I think if you were to look at all of the running back plays on the slate, I would probably rank him second overall in terms of the running back spot. What more can be said about him? This team loves to run the football. He's had success against pretty much every defense he's gone against. Oklahoma is the only defense this season, other than UTEP, where he only played a half, to hold him under 100 yards. And he scored a touchdown in every single game this season. So I think he's got a massive floor. Yes, Vanderbilt's a better run defense than pass defense, but they're going to be running the football a lot, and Sampson's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. Love Sampson again this week. At the wide receiver position, so these Tennessee receivers, they've never really this season given you a big payday, but they've also never killed you either. So, if you're looking to stack Nico up, you have a few options. When it comes down to picking which one, I don't have a clue which one to pick, but all of them are just kind of meh. Like none of these receivers, every time you play them, it feels like they just get you 8 to 10 DraftKings points at a super cheap salary, which you're kind of okay with. And you can still win a GPP if you have something like that happen. But anyway, let's break down the profiles. Dante Thornton Jr. is not a full-time player, but he is a big play threat. He is the one who will catch the long touchdowns for this team if there are any. Brew McCoy is an every down player. He is a possession receiver volume type of guy. 4 catches against Georgia, 4 catches against UTEP, 2 of which were touchdowns. So maybe he's starting to develop some chemistry with Nico, and maybe he is the guy that's going to be getting the looks in the red zone. Squirrel White is the slot who, coming into the season, looked like he was going to be the best receiver on this team. I still think he could be that. He had 6 catches against Georgia a few weeks ago, caught a touchdown against UTEP. Everything's trending in the right direction for Squirrel. And then Chris Brazell is also another every down player that is, at the start of the season, he was by far their most targeted receiver, but that's starting to cool off a little bit. But I do think that all 4 of those wide receivers for Tennessee are absolutely in play. And then you've got the tight end Kitzelman, who does play a decent role as well. So I do think that if you're looking to stack Nico, it's really hard to pick who, but all of them have profiles that they might not do anything for you, but they might not kill your lineup either, because they're all probably going to get you at the end of the day between 8 to 12 DraftKings points. On the Vanderbilt side, it's really hard to target anybody against this Tennessee defense. They rank 8th in the nation in rushing yards allowed and 18th in the nation in passing yards allowed. They're a really good defense on both ways. Diego Pavia is a super dynamic offensive weapon, but he's priced up at a salary that I don't really want to play him at. When you look at what he's done in SEC play, even the great games he had against Bama and Missouri, he hasn't topped 23 DraftKings or 24 DraftKings points in SEC play. At salary $7,000, I kind of want more for that if I want to win a GPP. And against this Tennessee defense, I don't see it being likely that he does that. At the running back position, Cedric Alexander is their guy, but Pavia takes up so much of the rushing workload and so much of the rushing touchdowns. I just don't really have any interest in playing him. And again, because of Pavia's dual threat abilities, he kind of makes the receiver position tough to target as well. The tight end Eli Stowers has been the most consistent receiving weapon in this team recently. And then you've got Skinner, who was their best receiving option against LSU. Had 7 targets, caught 3 of them for 72 yards and a touchdown. But I think you can totally bypass this Vanderbilt team and be A-okay with the rest of your lineup. Next up, we've got West Virginia taking on Texas Tech. This proves that it could be one of the biggest shootouts of the entire slate. Texas Tech is 3-point favorites with a game total of 64.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 34 to 31 in favor of Texas Tech. My best lineup last week almost won the $1 DraftKings tournament. I believe I finished at the end of the day 9th in that tournament. Was an absolute game stack of the Texas Tech Oklahoma State game. when you build around a game stack, especially when you know who's going to be having the success in the game stack, you can absolutely see your lineup skyrocket to the top of the leaderboard if that game ends up seeing like pinball-like scoring, which we have seen in Texas Tech games so far this season. Texas Tech is like one of the most game stackable teams out there. So I really do think this is a good spot to target both sides of this game. And really, I think it's pretty clear and obvious, at least in some regard, who's going to be scoring all the points for these two teams. So on the West Virginia side, they've got Garrett Green at quarterback. But let's be honest, if you play him in DraftKings, it's because of his running ability, not because of his throwing ability. West Virginia ranks 18th in the nation in rush rate, and a big reason why is because of how much they've run their quarterback. He came back from injury in Week 12 against Baylor, and in both the two games since, against Baylor and against UCF, he's averaging 20 carries in those games. So this guy absolutely has the upside to break the slate. Texas Tech is not a good defense in either regard either. They rank 66th in the nation in rushing yards allowed and 131st in the nation in passing yards allowed. So Garrett Green absolutely should be able to get them with his arm and with his legs here in this one. I think he has the upside to break the slate from the quarterback position here on this slate. At the running back spot, yes, it is a committee between West Virginia, but both of them are cheap and both of them have a good matchup. C.J. Donaldson Jr. was the guy who led the way last week. He had 19 carries for 96 yards and 2 touchdowns against UCF, good for 21.6 DraftKings points. But Jaheim White also saw pretty solid usage as well. 12 carries, 54 yards, and a touchdown, 12.5 DraftKings points. White is the more explosive player. Donaldson will likely see more volume. I would prefer to play White, in my opinion. However, I got to be honest, I don't think it's necessarily the best idea to play the running back with the quarterback, Garrett Green, because Garrett Green does vulture a lot of rushing touchdowns in the red zone. So I kind of think if you play both the quarterback and the running back, you might be raising your floor but lowering your ceiling. It's more likely that you're going to capture all of the West Virginia touchdowns, but you're not going to get leverage on either of the other side because, they're going to be taking, the potential points away from each other. So I really do think I like the running backs for this West Virginia side, but again, I'm probably not playing them stacked with quarterback Garrett Green. So who will I stack with quarterback Garrett Green? Well, Hudson Clement is emerging as the number one wide receiver in this offense. He was targeted 9 times against UCF, which tied his season high, caught 5 of them for 81 yards. He's the guy that had some huge performances last year. Hasn't really pieced it together for one this year, but last year he had some huge games. He's a big play threat. He would be the guy I would prefer to target with Garrett Green. Cole Taylor is the tight end. He has been a super consistent, high volume piece of this offense all season long. He's only $3,800. I think he's worth a look. And then Justin Robinson kind of let me down last week, but he is kind of taking over the role that Traylon Ray left when he got hurt. He's only $3,300. I think he is going to make my player pool as well. On the Texas Tech side, they've got quarterback Baron Morton. And what's interesting about Texas Tech is they've got the running back Taj Brooks. So let's go ahead and talk about him. Taj Brooks is great. He sees a ton of volume because he's like the only guy that gets carries. In his last game against Oklahoma State, he had 57 DraftKings points, which is insane. He also caught 9 passes in that game. So the bottom line is, because Brooks is the only running back that ever sees any kind of work in this Texas Tech backfield, I do think you can play him with Baron Morton, the quarterback. And the big reason why is because of how many plays this team gets off. They play a super no-huddle pace. And so even though it looks like Taj Brooks is getting a ton of carries, at least 25 carries in his last 5 games, they still rank 26th in the nation in pass rate, and they still get a ton of pass attempts off for Baron Morton as well, who 4 out of the last 5 games has been over 40 pass attempts. So I do think that Morton is worth a look. This is a great matchup for him. I do think Brooks is worth a look. This is a great matchup for him. West Virginia ranks 56th in the nation in rushing yards allowed and 111th in the nation in passing yards allowed. And last week, if you played Morton and Brooks together, you got a combined 91 DraftKings points from them. So I absolutely think that the combination of those two guys, I think that you can play Morton. I think that you can play Brooks. I think you can play Morton and Brooks. I think they're both great plays individually and as a team. At the wide receiver position for Texas Tech, you probably can't play Morton Brooks and Josh Kelly. Josh Kelly is a slot who is more of a volume-based guy. I would really prefer to play Douglas or Eakin. Douglas last game against Oklahoma State was their most targeted receiver, 11 targets, caught 5 of them for 105 and a touchdown. He's more of a big play guy than Josh Kelly. He's also much cheaper. And then Coy Eakin is actually a high school teammate of Baron Morton. He was targeted 10 times in that game against Oklahoma State, caught 7 of them for 90 yards. He's only $4,200. The passing, the receiving target tree of this team is so narrow between those three guys. I really do think it's pretty easy to pick out, if you're playing Baron Morton, you can play one or two of Kelly Douglas and Eakin. And like I said, I do think you can play Brooks as well. If this game ends up absolutely shooting out, you're going to see a lot of those Texas Tech guys and a lot of those West Virginia guys end up being some of the best plays on the slate. All right, that does it for the first 4 games. Let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then we're going to continue from. All right, before we continue, I do want to mention there are a few places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'm more than happy to answer any lineup questions that you might have if you reach out to me on Twitter. I also, tweet out all updates for the show as well. So if you're looking to stay in the loop or just looking to know what I think, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. And also, I record these episodes pretty far in advance, so sometimes my opinions change in between now and kickoff. So if you want to know if any of my opinions changed, any injury updates, whatever, just reach out to me on Twitter. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed to that Discord. And that is just a great place to go if you're looking for a community to be a part of where you can talk DFS with people, sweat it out with people and just have a great time. We've got every sport covered in there, from college football to college basketball to NBA, NFL, MLB when it's in season. So if you're just looking for people to talk DFS with, I cannot recommend it enough. And then if you want to know who actually makes my lineup on every single college football DFS slate, head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. I post all of my core plays as well as why they're my core plays there on Patreon. So you can get some good information from somebody who knows what they're doing with this and somebody who can help you get better at your DFS game, because a lot of times it's one thing to just post the plays. It's another thing to actually have an explanation on them as well, which I try to do for every single slate. All right, let's go ahead and continue on now with game number 5, which is going to be Kansas taking on Baylor. This one has some shootout potential as well. Kansas is 1-point favorites with a game total of 61.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 31-30 in favor of the Jayhawks. And on the Kansas side, they're going to do it by running the football. They rank 24th in the nation in rush rate. And Baylor is a defense that is not necessarily great in either regard. They rank 73rd in the nation in rushing yards allowed per game and 83rd in the nation in passing yards allowed per game. So you can really get after this Baylor defense whatever way you prefer. Jaylen Daniels is going to get after him via both ways. He is turning into a better thrower and is still a great runner. Against Colorado, his teammate Devin Neal kind of took all the touchdowns from him, but he still ended up with a decent day, about 19 DraftKings points in that game. He's only $7,100 here in this one. I'm inclined to believe that if Kansas gets to 31 points like they're implied, Jaylen Daniels is going to have a pretty good day on DraftKings. And then running back Devin Neal is getting a huge price jump after he put up 59.7 DraftKings points against Colorado. That was his ceiling performance of the season. Ran the ball 37 times. I don't think it's likely that he sees that kind of volume again or that kind of output again, but there's a chance, right? Like, he is really, really good at football. And this is a Kansas team that is playing for bowl eligibility now. So they're going to run him into the ground to try to get, to a bowl game. If you're not super familiar with college basketball or college football, Freudian slip there, there are some huge financial implications to making a bowl game. When I was at Charlotte, it was like a super huge deal for the program when we didn't reach a bowl in 2016, when we very much had an opportunity to do so. So this Kansas team wants to make this bowl game, and they're going to run Devin Neal as many times as it takes in order for them to get there. At the wide receiver spot, I don't think you have to stack Jaylen Daniels because of his abilities as a runner, but Luke Grimm has been the number 1 receiver for them all season long. Lawrence Arnold has been kind of a dud recently, but he was kind of their number 1 receiver last year. And then Quentin Skinner is another guy that, has had his ups and downs this year, but there have been some ups, and he does have a little bit of upside. But really, those are the only three guys that they're really throwing to outside the running back Devin Neal, because he'll catch some passes also. Last week, 4 for 80 and a touchdown. I don't mind the idea of a Daniels and Neal stack and just hoping that you capture all of the touchdowns between the two of them and hope that this Kansas offense ends up going off. On the Baylor side, they're quarterbacked by Sawyer Robertson, and he's pretty good. He's also a little bit of a dual threat as well. Last 2 games, he's been in negative rushing yards, but before that, he was a pretty good rusher. I think $7,700 is a little high to pay for him, if I'm being honest. This Kansas defense is much more able to be had via the pass. They rank 61st in the nation in rushing yards allowed per game and 92nd in passing yards allowed per game. So I do think this is a pretty good matchup for Robertson. I just wish he was a little cheaper. Like, if he was the same price as Jaylen Daniels, I would be much more willing to play him, because I find the two of them to be kind of similar as plays. And just, I'd rather pay for Daniels than at $600 cheaper when given that option. At the running back position, Bryson Washington has turned into the workhorse for this team. Now, everybody remembers his back-to-back 50 DraftKings points performances against TCU and West Virginia. And last week against Houston, a lot of people played him off the back of that and were disappointed when he only had 15.4 DraftKings points. But here I am to tell you, don't be alarmed by that. He had 28 carries in that game, which is the most he has had all season long. He topped 100 yards in that game, which he did for the third straight game. He just didn't find the end zone and didn't have any usage in the passing game. That's probably going to change here in this game against Kansas. Kansas is a worse run defense than Houston is. So I do think this is a pretty good spot for Bryson Washington. And I think that it makes a lot of sense to stack this game through the running game of both Kansas and Baylor. The wide receiver spot, it's been a mess all season long for Baylor, right? In the last game, Josh Cameron, who had been the number one wide receiver coming in, had a little bit of a dud, 2 for 16. Ashton Hawkins is the guy that had the big game against Houston, 6 for 65 and a touchdown. This is after he had 7 for 52 against West Virginia. So it's starting to look like Ashton Hawkins is turning into a genuine volume guy for this Baylor Bears offense. And at $3,600, I will take a volume guy any day of the week. He would be the guy that I would want to play from this Baylor receiver room. Next up, we have got the game, Michigan versus Ohio State. Ohio State is 20-point favorites with a game total of 42.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 31-11 in favor of Ohio State. I cannot recall the spread on this game being this large since Jim Harbaugh took over at Michigan. This could get ugly because I think Ohio State is going to want to put it on them after what Michigan's done to them the last 2 seasons. On the Michigan side, look, Ohio State's a really good defense. I have no desire to play any of them. Certainly not playing quarterback Davis Warren. If Colston Loveland is out, I'm certainly not playing any of the receiving options. At the wide receivers, or at the running back spot, Mullings and Edwards have a little bit of intrigue because they are both good running backs and they are both going to see a ton of carries. And that's Michigan's only way to win this game is on the ground. But I don't know. If you're selling yourself on the narrative that Michigan has been able to run on Ohio State each of the last 2 years, and that's why they're going to be able to do it again this year, I could buy that. But I don't know. If you want to go for it, because nobody's going to play either of these two guys, and the only way this team would win this game is by these two guys dominating on the ground. So I think if you want to put them in your player pool, that's okay. They're certainly not guys I'm going to be voting around. They're certainly not guys I have high expectations for here on this slate. On the Ohio State side, Michigan is a good defense. As much as wrong with the Wolverines this year, they're still a pretty good defense. Will Howard is up at $8,500, and I just think that's too much to pay for him. There's other quarterbacks I'd rather play, so he's a pass. At the running back position, it is a full-blown committee between Judkins and Henderson. They're too expensive for running backs that are in a 50-50 split, even if it is Ohio State. Pass. At the wide receiver spot, Jeremiah Smith is the big play guy, super talented freshman, but it's quite likely he's going to get shadowed by Will Johnson. So it makes it really tough to target him. Emeka Egbuka is very much a volume-based guy. I could see him having a big game. He would probably be the most likely rosterable player to me on this Ohio State team. I think you can honestly totally cross out this game altogether and be none the wiser. Next up, we have got Auburn taking on Alabama, the Iron Bowl. Alabama is 11.5-point favorites with a game total of 52.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 32-21 in favor of the Crimson Tide. Alabama has had some defensive struggles this year, though. Alabama ranks 68th in the nation in rushing yards allowed and 17th in the nation in passing yards allowed. That leads me to believe that you can actually play some Auburn guys on this team in DraftKings. Previously, when Nick Saban was at Alabama, you didn't want to play anybody on Auburn against Alabama because there was just no guarantee they were going to score any points. This Alabama team's a little different. They already want to fire Kalen DeBoer down there in Tuscaloosa. It's crazy. But I do think you can play some Auburn guys. Peyton Thorne, I generally, whenever I play him, he sucks. Whenever I don't play him, he has a good game. I never have him figured out. I'm probably not going to play him this week because I just think there's other quarterbacks elsewhere that are better values. But with all the metrics we just talked about with that Alabama defense, with Auburn implied to score 21 points, I get it. The guy that I want to play from Auburn is Jarquez Hunter. He is their workhorse running back. He had 28 carries against Texas A&M, scored 3 touchdowns in that game. Also was used in the passing game, 4 catches for 23 yards, 40 DraftKings points in that game against Texas A&M. Hunter can do that. That's his second DraftKings performance of over 40 points this season. I don't necessarily think he gets to 40 against Alabama, but with his just insane usage numbers, I think there's a chance he can get to 20 or even 30. At the wide receiver spot, Keandre Lambert-Smith has been Auburn's number 1 wide receiver all season long. He is their big play threat, which is a good combination to have when you're seeing a ton of targets, and a lot of them can go for big plays. I like him a lot, but I like even more Cam Coleman. Largely because he's $1,500 cheaper. But Cam Coleman, basically, it was a super talented freshman coming into Auburn. I don't know what's wrong with my DraftKings page here. It's not showing his player card. Cam Coleman was a super talented freshman coming into Auburn. I think it's quite likely that they look to feature him not only in this game, but going forward. Last game against Texas A&M, he was targeted 8 times, caught 7 of them for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns. Back-to-back games, over 34 DraftKings points for Cam Coleman. He's only $3,900. He's a guy that you can target super cheap with a ton of upside. On the Alabama side, Auburn's defense is just okay. They rank 24th in the nation in rushing yards allowed, 51st in passing yards allowed. Jalen Milroe, we talked about him all season long. He has the potential to break a slate, but man, he's had some duds this season, including against Oklahoma last week. Not a lot of people are going to play him. So you can roster a guy like Jalen Milroe who does have slate breaking upside. It's super low ownership this week. And it might work out. It might not. But if you want to find yourself at the top of a GPP leaderboard, he's one way that you can do it, in my opinion, because he does have that potential, that ceiling, and nobody's going to play him. At the running back spot, it's still a full-blown committee for Alabama. Miller and Haynes 50-50, and Auburn's got a good run defense. I don't see a whole lot of upside between playing them two. At the wide receiver position, you've got super talented freshman Ryan Williams at $6,700. I think that's way too expensive for what he's shown this season. And then you've got Jeremy Bernard, who is a slot receiver extraordinaire, who has only been in single-digit fantasy points twice this season, and both of them were blowout wins, ironically. So I do think that he has a very high floor. I think he's a very palatable cash game play. I don't think he's a great GPP play because we just haven't seen the upside out of him. But I do think he'll be highly owned in whatever format because people see how many times he has been in double-digit fantasy points and they see that floor. That's what people tend to gravitate towards. So I do think that he's going to be highly rostered, but I'm probably not going to be touching him in GPPs. Next up, we have another battle in the SEC between Arkansas and Missouri. Missouri is 3-point favorites with a game total of 53.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 28-25 in favor of the Tigers. On the Arkansas side, Missouri's defense is pretty solid. They rank 51st in the nation in rushing yards allowed and 33rd in the nation in passing yards allowed. However, Missouri has played a quite weak schedule, if I must say so myself. So I really do think that you can target this game and you can target this Arkansas side. Taylor Green is a dual threat who we have seen have the upside to break slates this season. You know, he had 28 against Oklahoma State early in the year. He had 48 against Mississippi State, 33 against Louisiana Tech. You know, he tends to show up against bad defenses, and I do think this Missouri team could be classified as a bad defense. Taylor Green is a dual threat, and he's got easy stacking partners. $7,800 is not a bad price tag to pay. At the running back spot, Jaquindon Jackson is the workhorse, and he is back fully healthy. 16 carries against Louisiana Tech. They wouldn't have given him 16 carries in that game unless he was fully healthy. $1,600 is a little pricey for me. I would rather pay down to guys like Jarquez Hunter, but I do think that Jackson is in play here on this one. The wide receiver position, Andrew Armstrong is by and away the number one wide receiver for this Arkansas team. He has not scored a touchdown in 4 games. In fact, he has 1,000 yards receiving. He's only scored 1 receiving touchdown on the season. He is just flat out due for some touchdown regression, and they don't have a whole lot of games left in Arkansas. So hopefully it'll come this one, and I think $6,300, the time is right and the pricing is right to play a guy like Andrew Armstrong. And I'll be honest, I'm not interested in anybody else on this Arkansas side except him. Paskey looks like a solid option, like when you look at like his fantasy points per game, but it was only in 1 game and he hasn't really been used since. Other than that, it's just a whole lot of guys who don't have super regular roles in the offense. So I'm just not that intrigued by the Arkansas pass catchers outside of Andrew Armstrong. On the Missouri side, Brady Cook is a misprice on DraftKings. He's only $4,900. If your argument is, wait a minute, Mike, how is he a misprice? He hasn't been good this season. He averages 15 DraftKings points a game. I totally get that sympathy. But Brady Cook last year was one of the best quarterbacks that we were rostering week in and week out. And not a whole lot has changed. Like, he was injured and he's came back, but he should still be like in the 6K range, in my opinion, just based off of what we've known from him from his body of work the last 2 seasons. And this Arkansas team is one of the biggest pass funnels on the slate. They rank 33rd in the nation in rushing yards allowed, really good run defense, and 120th in the nation in passing yards allowed, really bad pass defense. So I do think that Brady Cook is in a really good spot at $4,900 to be a super cheap quarterback that can break the slate. And I do think that a game stack here of Taylor Green on one side and Brady Cook on the other is a super viable option that is not that expensive. At the running back spot, with Arkansas being a great run defense and Noel and Carroll basically being a 50-50 split, I'm not interested. At the wide receiver position, I am really interested in Luther Burden III. So Luther Burden III is a junior. He is walking for senior night here in this game against Arkansas. Why? Because he's going to the draft. And I do think that Missouri is going to want to make a statement and get him the football in his last game in Missouri Tigers uniform at home. And he's coming off a back-to-back 20 DraftKings point performances. He's a huge volume king. And really, if this game shoots out, it's quite likely that he's going to have 7 or more catches. Quite likely he's going to score a touchdown. I really like Luther Burden a lot here on this one. Theo Weiss is kind of the Robin to Burden's Batman. He does have some big plays in him, but I feel like everything is trending towards a huge Luther Burden game here in this one. Next up, we've got Arizona taking on Arizona State. The Sun Devils are 8.5-point favorites with a game total of 53.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 31-23 in favor of Arizona State. Arizona State, I think this is a great situation to target in DFS. Anytime you have a super concentrated offense with a super high point total, just play the crap out of them. Like that strategy has not often failed you this year. If you just said, hey, this is an offense where I know where the points are going to come from. I know they're going to score a lot of points. I'm going to play it. And that strategy is kind of foolproof, right? So who should we play from this Arizona State side? Well, Sam Leavitt is the quarterback, and he's okay. I think he's a little overpriced at $7,300. I think there's quarterbacks with better profiles like Jalen Daniels who are cheaper, but 31-point total. He's a dual threat. He can throw it as well as run it. He has some rushing upside. Hasn't scored a rushing touchdown in the last 6 games, though. So that might be due for one. But $7,300 I don't think is a great price tag, but I do think the situation is right to play. If you don't want to play the quarterback, I think the quarterback might actually be one of the least important parts of this stack. Cam Skattebo is an absolute workhorse running back. He returned from injury against Kansas State and disappointed a little bit, only putting up 15 DraftKings points. But last week against BYU, he was on fire. 39.9 DraftKings points in that game, 3 touchdowns, 147 rushing yards. Great performance. He can do it again here against this Arizona defense. Arizona is a bad defense in both ways. They rank 96th in the nation in rushing yards allowed and 86th in the nation in passing yards allowed per game. Just not a good defense. Skattebo has the chance to just run wild on them. And then at the wide receiver position, pretty much any passing success this team has had this season has been to Jordan Tyson. He was targeted 12 times in that game against BYU, caught 9 of them for 125 yards, did not score a touchdown, but still put up 24.5 DraftKings points, which made it 6 straight games of over 19 DraftKings points or more. That's pretty darn impressive. And so really you look at last game, Tyson and Skattebo, you had 24 from Tyson, you had 39 from Skattebo. So like you're talking 63 DraftKings points just off of those 2 guys. There's a chance they could do that again. Like I said, the team's implied to score 31 points. You know those 2 are going to be scoring the points. Don't try to get cute. Just play those 2 guys. And on the Arizona side, I think they have a really easy team to target on the other side as well. Now, Arizona State is a much better pass defense. They're ranked much better run defense as well. They're ranked 26th in the nation in rushing yards allowed and 68th in passing yards allowed. Noah Fafita is a guy that gives us no rushing upside and really hasn't thrown a ton of touchdowns or a ton of 300-yard games this year. He's the type of quarterback I don't like targeting in DraftKings. Look, if you're going to be a pocket passer, I need you to hit your 300-yard bonus, or I need you to throw for 3 or 4 touchdowns. And Fafita hasn't done that a whole lot. So he's not a guy I'm super interested in. However, with this game being very stackable, to me, that would be the way to deploy him, will be just a full-out game stack. At the running back position, Quali Conley has been the guy in this backfield for Arizona. He's really been up and down, though. He's super touchdown dependent. Games he scores a touchdown, he's great. Games he doesn't score a touchdown, he's kind of pedestrian. They've been giving a lot of carries to Kedrick Riscano, his backup, but really, to me, I wouldn't target Riscano. Conley is the guy you want, but I don't know. It's just hard for me to get to him. To me, if you were to play anybody on this Arizona side, it would be Ted McMillan. Who is kind of like Luther Burden West Coast version. He's a big-time target machine. Everybody knows he's going to the draft, and he's had 4 straight games over 19 DraftKings points. He also had a game earlier this season where he had 67 DraftKings points. Like, he gets that much volume. He has a super high ceiling. And with this Arizona State team being a little more able to be had through the air, if Arizona starts trailing and they just start chucking it up to Ted, that's a way for him to rack up a ton of fantasy points. And really, you've got the tight end Chris Hunter, who's been over 12 DraftKings points in 3 straight. But I'm not really interested in Hunter. I'm not really interested in anybody else on this team, to be totally honest with you. Next up, we've got Cal taking on SMU. SMU playing for the right to go to the ACC championship game in their first year in the league, which is quite impressive. SMU is 13.5-point favorites with a game total of 55.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 35-21 in favor of SMU. Now, SMU is a really good defense. Cal, this is not a good Cal team. Like, this is not the way you want to target Cal, in my opinion. SMU ranks 10th in the nation in rushing yards allowed and 102nd in the nation in passing yards allowed. So maybe your argument might be, well, Fernando Mendoza could have a ceiling game, right? Like he's had 3 games out of his last 4 where he's put up 29 DraftKings points or more. I mean, I think he's a solid GPP option for that reason because he does have a high ceiling, but I don't know. I just don't see it being super likely against this SMU team. Yes, it's there. Yes, the ceiling is a possibility, but I'm just probably not going to play it. And with the SMU run defense being so good, I'm probably not playing Jade Knott this week either, or his backup Javian Thomas. Just not interested. And then the wide receiver position, you never really know who's going to go off for this Cal team. The guy in recent weeks has been Jonathan Brady. He's had 6 targets against Stanford, had 6 catches against Syracuse, 3 touchdowns over those last 2 games, but it's really hard to get super excited about any of these guys. Maybe you could go with a Mendoza Brady stack, or maybe one of these other Cal receivers floats your boat, but I just think you can just cross off Cal this week and be none the wiser. On the SMU side, Cal is a really good defense also. They rank 17th in the nation in rushing yards allowed and 71st in the nation in passing yards allowed. So we have seen a lot of chalk Kevin Jennings this year because he's been really good and he's been really cheap on DraftKings. I don't necessarily think that Cal is like a bad defense. So I really think this is not the best spot to target him in, but like SMU's implied to score 35 points. So if they score 35 points, it's quite likely that Kevin Jennings is going to be accounting for multiple touchdowns. I don't think he's a bad play, but I don't think he's the best play on the slate either. The running back position, Brashad Smith is their guy in the backfield. Again, Cal's a really good run defense. I'm probably not paying for Brashad Smith. I'd rather just pay up for like Scadaboo or Taj Brooks. At the wide receiver position, Jordan Hudson has finally emerged as the wide receiver 1 for this team. Back-to-back games over 17 DraftKings points. He's only $4,400, but now he's in concussion protocol. So like you kind of like with this SMU team, we talked about over the last 2 years how they play a huge rotation of receivers. They're super inconsistent in their usage. They finally take 3 steps forward and they make a few guys their prominent targets. And now it's 1 step back because that guy is hurt. So that's a little bit disappointing. But if he does not go, Keyshawn Smith, Roderick Daniels, and then the tight end Matthew Hibner are going to be the guys that are going to see most of the snaps, as well as Moochie Dixon all the way down here at $3,300. So I don't mind the idea of playing either of those guys as super cheap stacking partners or super cheap one-off plays, because especially if Hudson is out, you know that they're going to get targets and you know that they're going to be on the field. Next game up, we have Miami taking on Syracuse. This could very well be the game of the slate. Miami is 11-point favorites, game total of 67.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 39-28 in favor of Miami. This is the highest game total on the entire slate. Miami is a team that is going to throw it all over the yard. They're ranked 20th in the nation in passing rate. And Syracuse is a defense where it's a little bit better defending the pass. They rank 44th in the nation in passing yards allowed per game, 84th in the nation in rushing yards allowed per game. So this is not the best spot in the world to target Miami in, but the game environment says that it is. And so Cam Ward in these shootout type of games is how you want to target him, right? The Duke game where they scored 53 points, he had 39 DraftKings points. The Louisville game, which was a 52-45 game, 34 DraftKings points. The Cal game, 39-38, 36 DraftKings points. I can go on and on with how these shootout type of games benefit Cam Ward. And so I think that if you're looking to stack up one single game, this would be the one to do it. You're going to have to find some cheap pieces because Cam Ward is all the way up there at $10,700. At the running back position for this team, Damian Martinez is turning into the guy again in the backfield, but I would rather just play this game through the passing game. I don't think it's super likely that Martinez is going to get there. If he does, it's going to be because he scores multiple touchdowns. At the wide receiver spot, Xavier Restrepo is still the wide receiver 1 for this team, and he is priced like it. He's kind of had 2 not so great DraftKings performances in a row, but he is still the number 1 wide receiver, still the most targeted receiver. After him, Jacoby George kind of took a big step forward last week as the wide receiver 2, targeted 9 times against Wake, caught 7 of them for 91 yards and 2 touchdowns, 28.1 DraftKings points, which led all Miami receivers. He's the guy I would want to target as the wide receiver 2. In all honesty, and he's very priced reasonably at $5,000. Isaiah Horton, Sam Brown Jr. going to play a ton of snaps at wide receiver as well. Elijah Arroyo going to play a lot of snaps at tight end, but I really think George would be my favorite stacking partner with Cam Ward. Just when you consider the cost, when you consider the recent workload, he would be the guy I would look at. Now, on the Syracuse side, the reason why this game's projected to shoot out so much is because Syracuse is going to throw it all over the yard as well. They rank 3rd in the nation in pass rate, so they're going to throw. However, Miami's a pretty good defense. They rank in the top 40 in both rushing yards allowed per game and passing yards allowed per game. But Kyle McCord has been just an absolute gunslinger this year. Now, granted, he can throw you right out of a game, which he did at Pitt when he threw 3 pick sixes, 5 total interceptions. But he can also have some big time performances. Like he's been over 30 DraftKings points 5 total times this season, peaking last week against UConn with 35.9. So I do think that this is a pretty good spot for McCord. The passing volume is going to be there. That Miami gets caught in these shootout type of games all the time. Granted, the only problem is that he's super expensive at $9,000. That makes a game stack of this game really tough when you have to factor in Ward and McCord. Now, the good news is that the rest of the Syracuse skill players are very reasonably priced. Now, LaQuint Allen is super expensive at $8,400, but when you look at his usage in the passing game and when you look at the volume of carries he gets as well, even as much as Syracuse throws the ball, they still give a ton of carries to LaQuint Allen. He's very reasonably priced at $8,400. I don't think he's a bad play. If you're looking to just kind of pick off one piece of this Syracuse offense on the other side, I think he would be the guy that I would do it with. However, the wide receiver position, look, they price these guys way too cheap. Trevor Pena does have a questionable tag. He played limited snaps against UConn. I don't really know what the issue is. There's not really a whole lot of information out there. But if he is active and 100% for this one, he's a gross misprice at $5,600. Jackson Meeks is a super misprice if Pena does not play. Even if Pena does play, I think that Meeks is a little bit mispriced as well. I think that he's a pretty solid option at $5,700. And then the tight end, Arande Gadsden, down here at $5,200. This is actually the most targeted receiver on this team all season long. I think he is a supremely great option at $5,200. And again, I think that you can play these Syracuse guys as one-off plays or as total game stacking pieces because of how cost affordable they are. Yes, they're not like super cheap value plays, super obvious value plays, but they're very priced reasonably for what they have done so far this season as an offense. Last game of the day is going to be Notre Dame taking on USC. Notre Dame very well playing for a spot in the college football playoff with a win in this game, given that they don't have a conference championship game. In this game, Notre Dame is 7.5-point favorites with a game total of 52.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 30-23 in favor of the Irish. On the Notre Dame side, Riley Leonard has been a guy that we've just plugged and played week in, week out. He was a little bit of a disappointment last week against Army because he just didn't really account for a whole lot of touchdowns. The Notre Dame offense scored 49 points, and he only accounted for 2 of the touchdowns, which is not his MO. Most of the time when this Notre Dame offense scores a lot of points, it's because Riley Leonard's scoring a lot of touchdowns, whether it's via his arms or his legs. Last 4 games have kind of been blowouts. They've kind of just murdered everybody ever since that loss to Northern Illinois. If this game stays somewhat competitive, which Vegas seems to think so, with it being a 7.5-point spread, then Riley Leonard should be called on to use both his arm and his legs quite a bit and should allow him to reach his ceiling against a USC team that has really struggled to defend the run in Big Ten play this season. And Notre Dame kind of built like a Big Ten team with a very big, very physical offensive line, which leads me to our next point, Jeremiah Love. So Jeremiah Love is a big play running back. He only needed 7 carries last week against Auburn to run for 130 total yards. He scored 2 touchdowns on the ground, also caught a touchdown as well, 35.6, his high DraftKings performance of the season. And oh, by the way, he scored a touchdown in every single game this season. So you've got a guy who is going up against a run defense that has been overmatched all season long. Does not need a whole lot of volume to get home and can break off a big play at any time. Jeremiah Love is one of my favorite running back plays on the entire slate at $7,000. Also, don't count out Jadarian Price. He is a guy that, they don't want to put too much carries on Jeremiah Love because they know that he is the present and future in the Notre Dame backfield. So they'll give Jadarian Price a lot of carries just to kind of ease up the workload of Jeremiah Love. Last week against Auburn, Price had 10 carries, more than Love, and scored 2 touchdowns, put up 17.3 DraftKings points at a salary of $3,100. He's still only $3,500. If this game gets out of hand, I think it's quite likely that Jadarian Price comes in and scores a rushing touchdown. If not, gets, double-digit carries. So I think he's a pretty solid punt play at the running back position at $3,500. At the wide receiver position, look, just don't play any Notre Dame wide receivers. All Riley Leonard really wants to do is run. Jeremiah Love is scoring touchdowns as well. This receiving room is there a bunch of touchdown or bust plays. The one argument I can make is that Mitchell Evans was a great tight end for them last season. He got hurt, was not 100% at the start of the season. He's now back to his full 100% role. $3,200, maybe he's worth a look. On the USC side, they recently made a quarterback switch to Jaden Mayava, UNLV transfer. In his 2 starts, he's put up 28 DraftKings points against Nebraska and 12 against UCLA. That's average out to 20 a game, which is pretty good. But really, when you think about Notre Dame all season long, Bryson Daly last week managed to come through for a really good DraftKings performance because of his legs, because he scored Army's only 2 touchdowns. But really, Other than Bryson Daly last week and Ontario Brown of Northern Illinois in week 2, has there been a single player against Notre Dame all season long who's been a guy that like you could win a GPP with in your lineup on DraftKings? I can't think of any. And really last week, nobody played Daly, and you could have been totally fine fading him. There were other quarterback options on the slate. So I'm fine fading Mayava here in this one. And at running back, I really like Woody Marks, especially because of his usage in the passing game, but I really don't like the matchup, and I'd rather just pay up for some of the other good running backs here on the slate. At the wide receiver position, it looked like we were starting to get some separation from some guys on USC, and then they made a quarterback change, and now we're right back into kind of this muddled mess of a wide receiver rotation. In the last 2 weeks, Kyron Hudson has been the most productive DraftKings wide receiver for USC. 12.5 DraftKings points against Nebraska, 13.9 against UCLA. So maybe he's the guy that you can look to as Mayava's guy. But Mekhi Lemon still has a pretty sizable role. Last week, 2 for 69. Zachariah Branch is also their big play guy. Against Nebraska, he had 16 DraftKings points. So I still, though, they're going up against Notre Dame defense that no receiver has really done a whole lot against all season long. So I'm totally good just passing on this entire USC offense just because of the defense that they're going up against. All right, that is going to do it for the DraftKings main slate for Saturday, week 14, last day of the regular season. Hopefully we gave you guys all the information you need in order to build some successful DraftKings lineups here on this Saturday main slate. And that's going to do it for us, guys. If this video helped you out in any way, please hit the like button on YouTube. Please rate and review the audio. I cannot stress enough how much it helps me out when you guys do that and how much I appreciate it when you guys do. It helps the podcast so much, helps people find it, helps grow the community, and I really, really appreciate it. I can't stress it enough. So as we're closing out this college football regular season, if I've helped you in any way, please help me back out, like, rate, and review. But anyway, that's going to do it for us, guys. Remember, if you want more from me, follow me on Twitter, join the Fantasy Corner Discord, or hit up the articles on the Patreon. But that's going to do it. That's going to do it for the last, big slate of the season, which kind of has me sad for a little bit. I mean, obviously, we're going to have the bowl season slates. We're going to have the college football playoff slates. But those aren't going to be a full 12 games. This is the last big one of the season. So let's make it a good one. Best of luck to you guys here on this Saturday main slate. Thank you guys for watching and listening to this point, and I will see you guys next time.